About the next important component of a cell, that is cell wall. As I had mentioned before, cell wall is present only in plant cells. So this is very important to remember that animal cells have only one boundary, that is cell membrane. Plant cells have cell membrane, but outside cell membrane they have a cell wall also. So what kind of boundary is cell wall? So it is a rigid covering outside plasma membrane. Now when we were talking about the cell membrane or plasma membrane, I told you that it is a very thin and delicate boundary. It is not very rigid or strong, but unlike that, cell wall is a rigid covering. So that is an important difference between a cell wall and a cell membrane. So often people get confused with cell wall and cell membrane. So cell membrane is a bigger term than wall. So membrane is present in both of them, both plants and animals. But cell wall is only in plants. Now why do plants need a rigid covering? That's because plants are more delicate. They have more flexibility. That's why you would have seen that it is very easy to tweak the stems of a plant or to break it off, because plants cannot protect themselves as such. They cannot move from one place to another. So they need more protection, and that is why there is this rigid covering called cell wall. So if you look at a plant cell, this is how a plant cell looks like. So this yellow colored boundary is the cell membrane, and just outside the cell membrane you have another green boundary, that is cell wall. So now we are talking about the cell wall. So it is non-living, rigid and fully permeable. So cell wall is fully permeable. That means it fully allows the passage of particles across it. So it doesn't see which particle is allowed to go, which particle is not allowed to go. So it just allows everything. So it is a fully permeable membrane. So that is why there is a cell membrane inside, because even though cell wall allows particles, but if that particle should not be allowed to enter, then it will be stopped by the cell membrane. Cell wall is non-living, it is not living, and it is rigid. So it is just to provide rigidity or mechanical support to the plant cells. So that is the purpose of cell wall. So it is composed of cellulose. So cellulose is the main component. Like in case of cell membrane, it was made up of lipids and proteins. But here it is made up of cellulose. What is a cellulose? Cellulose is a type of carbohydrate. So it is a type of carbohydrate. So this is how the structure of cellulose looks like. So this is how it is, a very complex structure, and it is a polysaccharide. That means many small units of monosaccharides or simple sugars get joined together to form this complex branched structure of cellulose. So quickly look at the function of the cell wall. Now it is present specifically in plant cells to provide structural strength to the plants. Now why is it that plants need special structural strength? That's because there are many reasons responsible for this. One of this is plants are immobile. So they cannot protect themselves against adverse conditions. For example, if you talk about human beings, or if you talk about any other animals, now they are capable of moving from one place to another. So if there is a storm, so there is a strong wind blowing suddenly, so what do? You tend to run away and hide somewhere or get inside a house. So that's how you can protect yourself. Similarly, if the temperature is very cold or if it is very hot, so you can do something to protect yourself because you have the capability to move. But with plants that is not there. They are immobile. So they are more exposed to the changes in the environment. So they are more exposed to these kind of variations. So therefore, they need to be well protected, and that is why this additional cell wall is present to provide them additional structural strength. So this cell wall is rigid, and therefore it gives that rigidity to the plant cell. It also prevents bursting of cells in hypotonic solution. Now just now we discussed what happens in hypotonic solution. Hypo means less. So when the concentration of water is less inside the cell. That means the concentration of water is more outside. So what will happen? Water will move from outside to inside. So the cell will start swelling up. Now as a result, what can happen is, if the cell swells too much, it can break. That's because if there is no cell wall, in that case it can break, because the cell membrane is anyways thin and flexible. But in plant cells, since they have an additional rigid cell wall, so the cells do not burst easily even when it is present in hypotonic solution. What happens in this case is, now as the cell swells, so a pressure is exerted on the cell wall. So cell wall is rigid, so a pressure is exerted on the cell wall. The cell wall, had it been very delicate and thin, it would have bursted. But it is also rigid. So the cell wall will exert a counter pressure. So it will exert an equal and opposite pressure. Therefore, the plant cells can withstand greater changes in surroundings than animal cells. I mean, that is how the plant cells have been equipped, that even though they cannot move, but they will be able to manage with the variations in the environment. So now let us quickly compare the cell wall with cell membrane. Now there are quite a few differences. Let us quickly see. First of all, cell wall is present only in plant cells, but cell membrane is present in both plant as well as animal cells. Cell wall is non-living, but cell membrane is living. As I said, cell membrane is present inside. Cell wall is permeable, it allows everything to pass across it, but cell membrane is selectively permeable. It will only allow selective substances, and that too, the substances will flow across the cell membrane as per the concentration gradient. Cell wall is rigid, cell membrane is thin and delicate, and it is also flexible. Thank you. Please visit about a very important component of the cell, that is nucleus. So what is nucleus? Now if you look at a cell, you will always be able to notice a structure which is somewhat spherical, and it is somewhat located towards the center of the cell, and that structure is nothing but nucleus. So here if you see in this cell, which is the prominent central structure that you can see, this structure. So this is the nucleus, and this nucleus is present in both animal cell as well as a plant cell. So this is an animal cell and this one is a plant cell. So here also you can see a prominent spherical structure here, and this structure is nucleus. So nucleus is a spherical or oval structure near the center of a cell. Now it is not always present at the center. Now sometimes, especially in plant cells, what happens is there is a big vacuole present inside the cell, and this vacuole is an organelle which is specific to plant cells. So it has a major role to play in plant cells. Therefore, they are quite big in plant cells, and due to this large sized vacuole, it often pushes the nucleus towards the periphery, and that's why in plant cell you often might see that the nucleus is almost towards the side or towards the periphery and not towards the center, but otherwise it is located near the center of a cell. Now if you talk about the shape of the nucleus, sometimes it is spherical, mostly it is spherical or oval, but sometimes it can be of different shapes also. For example, in some organisms like paramecium, we spoke about paramecium, right? It is a protozoa and it is a unicellular organism. And here in paramecium, if you look at the shape of a nucleus, it has bean-shaped nucleus, somewhat like this. This type of shape is there in paramecium. Similarly, if you look at the blood cells, the RBCs, WBCs, when you look at the blood cells, the nucleus, the shape of the nucleus, they have lobed nucleus. So lobed nucleus would be something like this, where you have, it is kind of two halves which are joined together. So that is called a lobed nucleus. Again, if you look at the cells of smooth muscles, so the smooth muscle fibers, if you look at them, so their cells have an elongated nucleus, something like this. So the shape of the nucleus is not necessarily spherical for all the cells. So for some cells, they can be of different shapes as well. So it is present in both plant and animal cells. So that is another important thing, because nucleus is something which plays a very significant role, especially during cell division. So we will talk about the role of nucleus in the next few slides. So without nucleus, a cell cannot exist. Therefore, all plant as well as animal cells, they all have nucleus. So nucleus was first described by this scientist called Robert Brown, and Robert Brown was able to discover nucleus in the year 1831. So it was quite a long time after the cell was discovered. So cell was discovered around 1665. So you see, that was in 1600s, this is in 1800. So a long gap between the discovery of cell and the discovery of nucleus. But once the nucleus was discovered, it was later observed that even inside the nucleus, there are so many important components which are present. So let us talk some more detail about nucleus. So talking about the significance of nucleus, why do we say that nucleus is one of the most important component of the cell? That's because it is the control center of the cell. What do we mean by control center? So it is called control center because it participates in some of the very important activities of the cell. That is, it helps in movement and it helps in reproduction. Now we have learned from the cell theory that cells always arise from pre-existing cells. Now how will cells arise from pre-existing cell? When the pre-existing cell divides. So cell division is nothing but a way of reproduction where new cells are being produced. And in this cell division, the major role is played by the nucleus. So nucleus plays the central role in the formation of new cells, that is in cell division or reproduction. And it also plays a very important role in movement. Now, just imagine these are two very important roles as far as a cell's life is concerned. So now, since nucleus controls all the vital activities, therefore it is called the control center of a cell. Now that we are talking about the nucleus, and we are also going to talk about the various components present inside the nucleus. Now it is important to specify the two types of cells which are classified based on the type of nucleus they have. So these two types of cells are eukaryotic cell and prokaryotic cell. So what do we mean by eukaryotic and prokaryotic? The word eu means true. So true and karyotic, the word karyon means nucleus. So those cells which have a true nucleus, they are called eukaryotic cells. Whereas there are another group of cells which do not have a true nucleus. Let us see what are these. So eukaryotic cells, they have well-defined nuclear membrane. So when we talk about a nucleus, so there is a wall which separates the nucleus from all other components inside the cell. So that wall is called nuclear membrane. Like how you have a cell membrane outside cell, similarly you have a nuclear membrane outside the nucleus. So those cells which have a very well-defined nuclear membrane, so they have a distinct nucleus, something like this. Let us suppose this is your cell. And inside the cell you have a nucleus. Now how do you know this is your distinct nucleus? Because you have a nuclear membrane which separates the nucleus from other parts of the cell. So this type of cell is called eukaryotic cell. But there are certain cells where the content inside the nucleus, it just remains scattered within the cell. So there is no specific nuclear membrane. They are called prokaryotic cell. Now this is very important because certain group of organisms are prokaryotic because they do not have a true nucleus. So here we can say that since you have a particular well-defined nuclear membrane, therefore you have a distinct nucleus or a true nucleus. That is why the name eukaryotic. Eu means true, karyon means nucleus. And here there is no distinct nucleus. So in this case, in case of a prokaryotic cell, so all the material inside the nucleus, that is just scattered anywhere inside the cell. In eukaryotic cell organelles are present. Now I have already told you, right, the various components which are present inside the cell, they are called cell organelles. So these cell organelles, in case of a eukaryotic cell, this is eukaryotic, you have specific cell organelles which are present like this. So they are all distincted from the other ones by a specific membrane. But in case of prokaryotic cells, many cell organelles are absent. Most of the cell organelles are not at all there. Eukaryotic cell region bounded by nuclear membrane contains DNA and protein. So this region, that is nucleus, inside the nucleus what do we have? We have DNA. What is DNA? So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. We will learn about these later. In fact, in your higher classes you learn a lot of detail about DNA. So DNA is that particular thing which contains the information for inheritance. Like you would have observed that we all look very similar to our parents. Why? Because some of the traits get carried over from our parents' generation to our generation. Similarly, our kids might have similarities with us. That's again because some of the traits are being carried over from our generation to the next generation. So this concept of passing of traits from one generation to the next generation is called heredity, and this type of inheritance is because of DNA. So DNA is present inside the nucleus, and that is why we say that nucleus plays a very important role during cell division. Whereas in case of prokaryotes, there is no specific region which contains DNA or protein. It is an undefined region with nucleic acid. So these type of nucleic acids like DNA, they are just scattered anywhere inside the cell. Now, examples of eukaryotic cells are most of the plant cells and animal cells. They are eukaryotic, that is, they have distinct cell organelles, they have a distinct nucleus with a proper nuclear membrane. Examples of prokaryotic cells are bacteria and blue-green algae. So bacteria, they are unicellular also, so they just have one cell, and inside that one cell also, they do not have separate organelles. It is like everything is scattered inside. So now that we have discussed both these type of cells, let us quickly see how they look like. So this is how they will look like. So in eukaryotic, this is an animal cell and this is a plant cell. So these are examples of eukaryotic cells, because here you see you have a specific nuclear membrane. So this membrane, this layer which you see outside the nucleus, that is the nuclear membrane, and this entire structure is the nucleus. Not only nucleus, here you can see that other cell organelles, they are also very distinctly seen as separate. So the same is true for the plant cell also. You can separately see each of these organelles. Nucleus is also bound by a nuclear membrane. But on the other hand, if you look at this prokaryotic cell, so this is a bacterial cell. So this is how the cell of a bacteria looks like. So here you see inside the cell, you really don't have a lot of cell organelles. You really don't see much. So all you can see here is some coiled structures present here, and this is nothing but your DNA. So the DNA is lying just scattered. There is no membrane called a nuclear membrane. There is no distinct nucleus. Nothing is there. So all the material is present just scattered somewhere inside the cell. So this is how a prokaryotic cell looks like. Now knowing eukaryotic and prokaryotic cell is very important. So now that we have discussed this, let us look at the structure of nucleus. So this is how nucleus looks like. So this is not the entire cell, just the nucleus. As I said, the nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. So if you see here, this is your entire cell. The entire sphere which you see here, that is the complete cell. Inside the cell, the center of the cell has a spherical structure, which is the nucleus. So here this orange ball which you see is the nucleus, and on this nucleus you have a center, and that is the nucleolus. So let us quickly look at the various parts inside the nucleus. So here the thing which you see on the screen is the nucleus. So the first of all is the nuclear membrane. So this outer membrane, so you can see the outermost layer of this ball is the membrane which separates it from other components inside the cell. So this nuclear membrane also has tiny pores on its surface. So here you can see these are the tiny pores, and these pores are called nuclear pores. So if you talk about the nuclear membrane is made up of lipids and proteins. So the membrane is made up of lipids and proteins. You remember the lipids and proteins also form the cell membrane. So the same things form the nuclear membrane as well. So what is the purpose of nuclear membrane? What does it do? It gives shape to the nucleus. So normally any membrane, any outer layer, it provides shape to the particular entity. Like cell membrane gives shape to the cell. Similarly, nuclear membrane gives shape to the nucleus. And why do we have these nuclear pores? These are small openings on the nuclear membrane. So due to the presence of these openings, the nuclear membrane is not continuous. It is interrupted at intervals by these pores. Now why do we have these pores? So these pores are there to facilitate the transfer of particles from inside the nucleus to outside, or from outside the nucleus inside. So what kind of particles get exchanged between nucleus and the external environment? Those are proteins and RNA complex. So proteins which are synthesized, they move inside the nucleus. Sometimes RNA complex, they move outside the nucleus. So basically these pores help in the exchange of substances between nucleus and the outer nuclear space. Then the next important structure is nucleoplasm. Like how we have cytoplasm present inside the cell, similarly we have nucleoplasm present inside the nucleus. So what is nucleoplasm? It is a fluid which is present, which fills the entire empty space inside the nucleus. So here you see the yellow colored space inside, that is the nucleoplasm. So in this nucleoplasm are present all other structures are embedded in this nucleoplasm. So the nucleoplasm is made up of nucleoproteins, nucleic acids, proteins, enzymes, minerals. So all of these constitute the nucleoplasm. Next is the nucleolus. This central structure is the nucleolus. Like it is something like this. You have a cell. Somewhere towards the center of the cell you have the nucleus, and at the center of the nucleus you have the nucleolus. So this is your nucleolus, this one is the nucleus, and this entire thing is the cell. So center of the cell is nucleus and center of the nucleus is the nucleolus. So nucleolus basically is not a cell organelle, like nucleus is a cell organelle or other parts are cell organelles, but this is not a cell organelle. It is just a dense area which is present inside the nucleoplasm. Now this dense area becomes so noticeable that it has been named as nucleolus. Next important part is chromatin. So what are chromatin? So here you can see chromatin, which are of two types, heterochromatin and euchromatin. So these are nothing but thread-like structures which are present in the nucleoplasm. So these thread-like structures, they are very, very important, because these thread-like structures called chromatin will later become chromosome, and these chromosomes play a very important role during cell division. So these chromatin, earlier the chromatin will be like thread-like structures, but during cell division these chromatin will get converted into rod-shaped structures called chromosomes, and the chromosomes contain DNA and protein, and DNA is the genetic material. So DNA acts as the genetic material, that means it carries all the genetic information. It is because of this DNA that we look similar to our parents or grandparents. So you can just imagine how important nucleus is, because inside the nucleus you have all these important things. So now let us quickly describe each of the parts in more detail. Whichever part we discussed in the last slide, we will now discuss them in more detail. So let us start with the nuclear membrane. As I said, it is a double layered covering of nucleus. So here in the picture you can very clearly notice the double layered nuclear membrane. See, there are two lines. So these are the two layers of the nuclear membrane. The next thing is the nuclear pores, and as I said, it helps to maintain the shape of nucleus. So it gives proper shape to the nucleus. Next is nuclear pores. So these are pores on the nuclear membrane which allow transfer of materials to outside. So not only outside, some materials get transferred to outside, some materials enter from outside to inside. So what are these materials? These materials could be proteins. So proteins are examples of one such materials which might get exchanged between the nucleus and the outer nuclear space. Next is nucleoplasm. So what is nucleoplasm? It is the fluid which is enclosed by the nuclear membrane. So you can see here nucleoplasm, the fluid which fills the entire empty space inside nucleus. Next is the nucleolus. Now all these structures like the nucleolus or the chromatin, chromosome, so they all remain suspended in the nucleoplasm. So nucleolus is a structure embedded in nucleoplasm. As you can see here, nucleolus is embedded in the fluid. It can be one or many in number. So it is not necessary that one nucleus can have only one nucleolus. One nucleus can also have multiple nucleoli. And what is it made up of? It is made up of protein and RNA. So ribosome formation takes place here. What are ribosomes? Ribosomes are the sites of protein synthesis. So ribosomes are the place where protein synthesis happens. Now why protein synthesis is so important? Now if you look at each and every part of our body, everything at the end of the day is composed of proteins. So proteins are an integral part of our composition. So we are all composed of a lot of proteins. So these proteins need to be synthesized or they need to be manufactured somewhere. So they are also manufactured inside each and every cell. Where exactly inside a cell? In the ribosomes. So these ribosomes, where protein synthesis happens, these ribosome formation takes place here in the nucleolus. So just imagine how important nucleus is. Inside the nucleus you have the information for inheritance. Inside the nucleus you also have ribosomes which help in protein synthesis. You don't have ribosome inside nucleus. It's like nucleus can generate ribosomes which can later generate proteins. So that is also another very important function of nucleus. Now the question is, I mentioned that this nucleolus is not a specific organelle. Instead, it is just an area which is very dense. Now what makes it so dense? So nucleus contain chromatin threads, and these chromatin threads contain the genes. As I said, right, these are the chromatin threads, the green colored thread-like structures which you see, they are the chromatin threads. These chromatin threads later will become chromosomes, and these chromosomes contain the DNA. So now you will learn about the concept of protein synthesis in your senior classes. If you want to really learn about it, you can refer the biology videos of class 12. So there I have discussed about the concept of protein synthesis in more detail. So you will understand. So for now you can just understand that this nucleolus is nothing but a very dense area which contain the protein RNA complex that are being formed. So continuously protein and RNA, they will combine with each other and they will form protein RNA complex. And this area where a lot of protein RNA complexes are formed, that area becomes dense, and that area is called nucleolus. Then the next part is the chromatin. So chromatins are nothing but thin thread-like structures which are embedded in the nucleoplasm. As you can see here, these are the chromatin, the green thread-like structures. They are chromatin. Now chromatin, again, they are of two types. One is euchromatin and the other one is heterochromatin. So what is euchromatin? Euchromatin is nothing but the true chromatin. Eu means true. So this chromatin contains genes which can make RNA. So this chromatin has those genes which can form RNA, and from RNA we can synthesize proteins. So that is the normal process of protein synthesis. Now what is DNA, what is RNA, how we create proteins, that will become a little more complex for you at this level. So for that we have to refer class 12 videos. So that is euchromatin. And what is heterochromatin? So in heterochromatin, here the genes are not active. That means genes cannot directly make RNA. So what do? They just have extra copies of genes which are called junk genes. So they contribute towards regulation of protein synthesis. They cannot make RNA, which in turn can make protein synthesis, but they can control the process of protein synthesis. So they just have some dummy genes or junk genes. So that's about euchromatin and heterochromatin. Now chromatin, what is it made up of? It contains DNA, RNA and nuclear proteins. And for most of the animals, DNA is the genetic material. So this chromatin, they exist during the resting stage of a cell. So what do we mean by resting stage? Resting stage is that stage of a cell when the cell is not dividing. So that means the cell is not dividing to form new cells. So then it is called resting stage. So these chromatin will be present only during the resting stage. As soon as the cell starts to divide, so during the dividing stage, the chromatin will get transformed into chromosomes. So now we will talk about chromosomes. So what are these? So these are rod-shaped structures. So these thin structures, so chromatin are like thin structure like this, so thread-like structures. But when you talk about chromosomes, they are rod-shaped structures, somewhat like this. So many chromatin will join together to form such rod-shaped structures. So they are formed when chromatin condense together when the cell is about to divide, and that is when chromosome formation takes place. So now the cell is actually moving from the resting stage to the dividing stage. So here chromosome is made up of DNA and nuclear proteins, and DNA is the hereditary material, so it will contain the genetic information. It also contains information for inheritance, that's what will decide what will be your similarity with your father and what will be your similarity with mother. So because it is through these DNA that those genetic traits come to our body. Thank you. Talking about all this, it becomes very important to talk about gene, because we often see that, okay, sometimes you would have seen people scolding each other like, okay, you are so lazy, that's in your gene, because everybody in your family is lazy. So what they try to say is that there are certain traits which are present in your genes, and they get carried off from one generation to the next generation. So how they get carried from one generation to next generation? Through DNA. And this DNA remains inside the cell. So at that cellular level, the information are getting carried over from one generation to the next generation. So genes are nothing but the units of inheritance. So if you look at the structure of a chromosome, so on a chromosome you can see that there are genes which are located on chromosome. Now each gene can correspond to a particular trait. For example, you might have a gene for a specific eye color, you might have a particular gene for a specific hair color. So for every trait you have a particular gene. And because of these genes, you can actually resemble stuffs between one generation and next. So looking at this family picture, you can see that this couple, they have two kids. So if you look at this kid, the hair color of this kid is similar to his father, but the hair color of this kid is quite similar to his mother. If you look at the eye color, so again the eye color of this kid is similar to the eye color of the mother, but the eye color of this kid is different from both father and mother. So some traits might be new, but there are some traits which are carried from the previous generation. So genes are actually the units of inheritance. They control the traits of living organisms. So they decide which traits will be similar and which traits will be different. So that's how it regulates the traits of living organisms. So where are these genes located? Now inside our body we have so many cells. Now if you concentrate on one particular cell, so one particular cell would be like this, and inside this cell we have something called nucleus. So now if we look at nucleus, so if you try to magnify the nucleus, this is how it will look like. So inside this nucleus, what are these? This is the nucleolus. So this dense region is the nucleolus. And what are these thread-like structures? These are nothing but the chromatin. Now, these chromatin during cell division will condense to form chromosome. So this is a chromosome, which is a rod-shaped structure, as you can see here. Now on these chromosomes you have genes for different traits. The yellow colored structures which you see here, these are the genes, and each gene is for a specific trait which you see in an individual. Now what are these genes made up of? These genes contain nothing but DNA. So DNA is a nucleic acid, that is deoxyribonucleic acid. That is the full form of DNA, and it has a double-stranded structure like this. Now, I will not get into all these details right now because it will become too much complicated for you. Now, why I am just touching upon it is you should at least have some idea that, okay, what is there inside our body. Now, when you go to your higher classes, you will get to know how exactly each of these behave. So now that we have discussed about so many important things, let us quickly see the significance of nucleus. So we saw that nucleus is very important for cell division. Nucleus is very important for inheritance also. So nucleus is the control center of the cell. It helps in movement, that is movement of substances like ribosomes, proteins and RNA through nuclear pores from nucleolus to cytoplasm. So these movement of substances is very, very important. That's because it is, you just think of a situation like this. For example, your mother prepares food for the entire family and she prepares the food inside the kitchen of your house. Correct? So now, let us say you are at your school, your father is at his office, your brother is in his college. So everybody is in different place and your mother is cooking food inside your house. Now, if she wants to send the cooked food as in the form of tiffins to each one of you, she needs somebody who can carry it to each one of you. Right? So if the food remains packed inside your kitchen, will you be able to eat it from your school? No. So you need somebody who can carry the food from your kitchen to your school. Similarly, your father would need somebody to carry the food from your kitchen to his office. Similarly, your brother would need it to be carried from the kitchen to his college. So you need a medium which can actually help in transferring the food item from the source to the right destination. So exactly the same thing is being done here. So here, due to the presence of the nuclear pores on the nuclear membrane, so the substances which get synthesized inside the nucleus that can come out of the nucleus and can reach other parts of the cell. Similarly, the substances which are present outside the cell and they need to enter inside the nucleus, they can also enter through the nuclear pores. So that is how movement of substances is also very, very important. Next is cellular reproduction. The chromosomes which are present inside the nucleus, they play a very important role during cell division when new cells are formed. Now we will understand the process of cell division in class 11th because right now we do not have it in our syllabus. So in cell division, new cells will be formed. So those new cells need to have some traits from the parent cells, right? So for how will they get it? They will get it through the genes. And where are the genes located? Genes are located on the chromosomes. So one thing is, without chromosomes, cell division is not possible. So it plays a major role in cell division. Now if cell division doesn't happen, then what will happen? New cells will not be formed. So in that case, life will stop existing, because for life to exist, cells should keep on multiplying. More and more cells should be formed. So for formation of new cells and also for the inheritance concept, nucleus plays a very important role, and that is why nucleus is called the control center of the cell, because without nucleus, your cells will stop multiplying and as a result, life will stop existing.